Thanks for coming. So we're going to talk about Package Manager and making composer-aware modules. So my name is Ted Bowman. I'm Ted Bow on Drupal.org, Principal Software Engineer at Acquia's Drupal Acceleration Team. Was the tech lead, I guess currently the tech lead of Automatic Updates Initiative, but currently working on Experience Builder. And so how many of y'all are developers? Yes. How many people have made Drupal custom modules? Okay, so good. The right crowd. You came to the right session. Okay, so Package Manager is a core experimental module. It is, I think in the fall it got in. It's still alpha, which means its API could change some, but there's a contrib version, and I've been programming the demos off the contrib version, though the core version's API right now is pretty much identical. If you have both installed, Drupal selects the contrib version, so you don't have to worry about Drupal getting confused of having two versions of the same project in your code base. So it's a Composer API module, performs Composer operations. It stages them so they don't affect your live site until you have a chance to review. And then it inspects Composer packages on your site. So it's used by Automatic Updates, which is included in Drupal CMS. And that's where you'll find there's not a contrib project for Package Manager. You use Automatic Updates, and it's included as a submodule. It provides both core and contrib updates. As of now, the background updates are only supported for core, not contrib. And then Project Browser also uses it, which is also in Drupal CMS, and it installs contrib projects and recipes. So I'm not sure what the restrictions currently on recipes, if they only will install ones that already have modules on your site, but potentially Package Manager could be used to installing modules that your recipe requires but aren't currently in your code base. So all of the examples that I'm going to go through today are on GitHub repo, Ted Bow Package Manager examples. So I think they're pretty much in the same state. They may evolve as I do this presentation other places, but I sort of veered towards simplicity in some cases, not say more than correctness, but tried to point you to the core or the Automatic Updates code for more detailed examples, because I didn't want the examples to be overly complex. Okay, so the basics of Package Manager is we have stages and we have events. Package Manager stages are individual classes that perform specific Composer operations, and they all extend this stage-based class, which you'll find in Package Manager. And a lot of the functionality that you basically, when you create your own stage, you kind of often have to do very little besides just give it a marker to say it's unique. Stage examples is Automatic Updates ships with two stages, one called the update stage, and that's the one that's used in the form, and then console update stage, Automatic Update ships with the console script that performs similar operations but in the background. And then Project Browser ships with an installer stage for installing new projects. And most of the if you look at the examples in those two modules, those classes actually get kind of complex, but the ones that I show here are simpler. So the stage lifecycle, first is create, where it copies the active site into a staged copy, and Package Manager has logic to exclude certain folders that it doesn't need, say like the site files folders, your Git repos. The purpose of this is basically get your code base over to a staged copy, not your whole site. And then by default, there's the require stage where you require certain packages through Composer onto the staged copy. And then the apply state where it copies back the staged copy to your active site. And then finally, the destroy, where it sort of flags your staged copy for deletion. So an example for automatic updates is, say you're on 11.0 and people are looking at your site. Automatic updates would create a copy of your current site at 11.0. Composer comes in, changes it to the new updated version, puts your site in maintenance mode, and then updates your site, copies it over. So the last operation is not actually a composer operation, it's just a sort of dumb file copy. Well, not completely dumb, there is some logic in it. But the idea is that your site, the code base should be completely updated in the stage one so that any event subscribers that you have can actually inspect it and see, okay, do you want this operation to go forward? And we'll give an example later of a subscriber that can actually prevent that based on something that's in the staged copy. Okay. Okay, so the simplest stage in the example module is the installer stage, and it's basically just a class that extends stage base, and then it just declares the type. If you don't declare the type, it'll throw an error and say, hey, you have to declare a type. And the basic idea of this is that through the whole process of the create, require, and apply, delete, the same class has to be used for that whole operation so that you can't sort of swap out classes in between. So you sort of encapsulate all the specific logic for your operation within the one class. But if you're not doing anything sort of out of the ordinary, you basically just have to declare this class. And then you define it as a service. The logger thing is just a set logger. And then we're going to use it inside of a form. I guess the title's wrong there. So we're going to have a very simple installer form. And actually more of our logic is actually going to be in the form than in the actual stage. So this is what the first example will look like, just a text area. You put a project machine name or a URL of a Drupal project, and then it will install the module. So, so basically we're going to use 3 services provided, well, one provided by us, the installer stage, and then 2 more that are provided by the package manager module. The composer inspector module, which basically will allow us some information about sort of the global composer configuration, but more importantly in our examples, a list of installed modules both in the active site and in the stage site, and then a comparison between the two. And then the path locator is just something that the composer inspector needs to know if you want information on the active site or the staged folder. So the actual building of the form is very simple. The first part where we do the cancel form, I'm not actually going to go into that, but you can see it in the example. But the idea is that you can only have one package manager operation going on at the same time. So, and it's aware of all operations from any module. So you can't be updating core with automatic updates and then installing a module via project browser and then doing something else with our custom modules at the time. So only one operation, because you only have one code base, can go on at the same time. So there's, besides that sort of cancel form logic, we're just doing like a very basic text input form here. And so this is going to sort of like go over what we need to do special in related to package manager is more in the submit. So the first thing we do is we need to figure out the project name, and there's some logic in the validation that basically decides, is this a URL or is this a Drupal project machine name? But at this point, we should have gotten the project name in the form state. And Package Manager has a class called Project Info, and this is basically a wrapper around the update module in core. If you've ever used the update module to sort of figure out what available updates there are on your site on a low level, it's sort of very clunky. Basically, that code was, written 15 years ago. So it was very, it was great for the time, but it's kind of hard to deal with. So we've made sort of convenience methods around the update module in core. And the other thing that this allows you to do that is not really easily done with the update module in core is the update module in core only knows about project information on Drupal.org if that project is currently installed on your site, because of course originally it was meant to only grab this update XML from Drupal.org, but only for projects that you have on your site because it was meant for updates. So this basically allows us to not care if we currently have the project here or not in our site or not, but to just give it any project name, and then we can do stuff like here. The thing we want is the installable releases. So, so if we didn't get any releases, then we're going to say, well, this is either not installable on your site or it doesn't actually exist. So for this example, I don't delve into whether, why it's not installable. But the get installable releases will make sure that you only get back secure releases and only releases that will be compatible with your current version of Drupal. And then for our case, we always just want the last release to install. And it will only pull back the last release that's obviously compatible with our site. So this project, once we get the releases, the project release, this is actually a sort of newer class that's available in core, and this can sort of tell us a lot of information about each individual release. I think in this example, it's a web form release, 6.3 beta 2. But it can tell us, has convenience methods tell us, is it a published release, is it secure, is it unsupported, the actual core compatibility message. That's not the side I wanted to see. Okay, so now once we've figured out the Drupal project name, we also want to get the actual package name. So we're basically turned this into a composer package name, and we're also going to give it the specific version that we want to install. So we're not going to, Composer by default doesn't know anything about secure, supported releases as far as what Drupal.org knows about. So some metadata is available through Composer, but not all metadata. So if I had just passed it the package name, it would just get whatever Composer thinks is the most up-to-date version, which most of the time is going to be the same version, but not necessarily, because Drupal developers on Drupal.org can set releases as unsupported or mark it as insecure, and most of those insecure ones would be caught by a Composer audit, but I'm not positive if all of them would be, depending on how legacy they are. So after we do that, after we get the package name, this is sort of where we start to use our stage. So that this stage is an instance of the installer stage that we saw that just had the one line that told us the type it was. Create, again, does the copying your active site over to a stage folder. Require just takes an array of package names and possible versions, and possibly a version, and then apply applies it back to the site. So I'm going to show you a more complex example in a second, but for the purposes now, I'm going to call this post apply right after this, which I really should be doing in another request, but just for simplification, we're going to do it here right now. And post apply just says, hey, the update's been applied to your site. Does anybody want to do anything? So this will fire off all of these things. We're going to go through events in a second. We'll fire off events that modules can react to, and we're going to write one in a second. Or I've written one we're going to show. Okay, so and we catch stage exceptions, so basically saying if anything went wrong, we want to add it to the screen, and then at the end we destroy it. So basically, we enter web form, we hit install, some time goes by. So a lot of this is kind of slow because we're copying your whole code base over to a stage version. There's an issue with Package Manager now that basically is proposing to give the option to basically not stage the code base and just act directly on it, which probably in a lot of cases is fine. If you're doing local development, you probably are fine if just to apply code changes directly to your site. And some of our events can still be triggered in that case before they happen. You won't actually be able to just inspect the code base and sort of see, okay, do I want this change or not? But you can have information about, okay, you're going to ask to install this new module. I want to look at the version and decide whether I want it installed or not. So after some time goes by, then we're basically just going to get this message, yay, it was installed. So basically, the code that I showed you is all that you would need to do as a developer using Package Manager to sort of to have your own composer operations. You can make it more complex if you want to, but basically that sort of is all you need to do. Okay, so I told you a second ago that this is really not the way you should be doing this. So why you shouldn't be doing this is because basically every composer operation that you do could update running code. So in our example, if we install WebForm, and WebForm is obviously not enabled if we haven't installed it, then no running code is potentially going to change by applying the new WebForm to our module. But since it's a composer operation, at any point, WebForm could say, well, I actually need some vendor dependency. And maybe I need a particular version of a particular vendor dependency. Now, you may already have that vendor dependency on your site in another version. So it would change that version for you. So you can't sort of assume, you kind of have to assume when you're doing Package Manager that any operation that you have will update running code and will delete running code. Because it could clear out packages that Composer says, well, I no longer need this package. So what we don't want to do is when we update the classes are loaded before and after sort of comments is the way that PHP's class loader works is when you ask for a class, it's going to load it at that point. If you apply the update and do what we call post apply in the same request, you're going to have this sort of random state of some classes have been loaded before that and some classes have been loaded after, and you'll get a mixture of your non-updated site, which these files may not exist, but PHP may have brought them into memory, and then your updated site if you only request these classes after the update happens. So basically the mix of old and old and new versions of classes that you don't really know which one's which, you don't want to run any code in that state if you can possibly avoid it. So Package Manager sort of gives you a way to, after you apply, just sort of reload and start with the new code base. So Package Manager will warn you if you do this. This is in the stage-based class if you actually try to fire off that post-apply and you're still in the same request. So basically what we're going to do is instead of just doing it all in one form submit, we're going to use the batch system. And there's a batch processor class that we'll see in a second. Where am I? Oh yeah. That class is something that's in the example module. Then it also points to a batch processor and automatic updates, which has a much more complex example if you want to look at it. Classes. Okay, so basically the same kind of idea, except for we don't directly do the begin, require, apply, and then destroy in the submit, but we basically just tell the batch system like, hey, here's our operations that we want to happen during the batch process. So this is our batch processor, and so the main difference here is that after we create the stage, we have to save the stage ID, because each new request has to say, if you see at the bottom where it says claim, it says, hey, I know the stage ID of the Package Manager operation that is happening right now. Please give me that stage so I can do further operations. And package managers sort of make sure that the stage that's asking for the ID is one, from the same user session, and two, from the same stage class. So I couldn't accidentally use the project browser installer stage to grab an automatic updates one. It would immediately tell me like, hey, this is not the class that you started the stage with. Yeah, so in begin, I call create, I save my session ID, and then in require, I get the session ID, claim the stage again, and then do require for the package. So in the previous example where it was just the submit and all the functions were sort of in 4 lines straight together, I didn't have to do the claim because it was all in the same request and I already owned the stage. But this is just a way to say like, hey, I know what the stage is, I'm the person that created it, and I'm the class that created it. That's the wrong direction. Okay, so the apply, where we're basically taking the code base and putting it back to the site. Again, I grab the stage ID, I claim it, but then I have to do this weird thing where I basically just tell the batch system to wait 1 second, because if I don't do that, I think this only happens in tests, but basically I have to say like, hey, definitely give me a new request, and that the batch system in core doesn't have a way to say absolutely never do this in the same request. Because when you see that bar going across in the batch system, usually those things, if they take time, will always be a new request, but it's not absolutely guaranteed. And because the post apply and the problem of like having the 2 different versions, the updated and non-updated, we want to absolutely guarantee that our next step is going to be a new request. Okay, and then the final thing is, again, we grab the stage, we claim it, we fire the post apply, and then we destroy the stage. So technically here, I don't really need, I could have split these all out into different batch operations, but because starting with post apply afterwards, it doesn't really matter if you have a new request at that point. Okay, so this is stages. We're going to get on to events, but anybody have questions so far? Yep.
The stages, what does that look like in the file system? Is it just in...
Yeah, just a PHP class. I think I have.
It's not an entire copy of the code base? I was just imagining.
Oh, yeah, so, yeah. There is an issue to change the name from stage because it is confusing. Because stage is sort of like a verb, like I'm staging the site, and stage is also, in our case, a noun, like the stage. So when I refer to stage, I'm referring to an actual just class, and this is the simplest class.
Okay, I think I got confused because you said basically it's applying the updates and then it will replace the code base.
Yeah.
Where does that second, or that temporary code base live?
So the temporary code base by default lives in your sort of system temporary directory.
Okay.
And you never really have to deal with it, but the other thing where we had the form and it has we asked for the service of the path locator. The path locator is the thing that's going to know like, hey, I know where the active working directory is, like your base of your composer project, not necessarily your web directory, and I know where your vendor directory is if that happens to be different, and I know where this staging directory is. So you basically just ask it where it is, and you sort of trust it. Okay. Any other questions?
Do you have any timeout issues with some of that? Because, like
Yeah.
composer, you can modify the composer setting, but do you have to do additional considerations?
Yeah, we send sort of longer timeouts, and then automatic updates actually fires the updates in a separate terminal process. So I don't do that here because that is sort of a pretty, not convoluted example, but, well, no, actually the form doesn't do that. But if you use automated cron, where cron's running in the background, we do actually fire off a separate console. But we haven't had issues with, as long as you're using the batch system and everything is in its own request, then the timeouts have been okay. I think one of the other things that Package Manager does is it has status check system where it looks through your system, your Drupal settings and certain stuff about your system. Can it find Composer? And it won't let you start if certain things are basically going to probably make you fail. And I think one of those things is the timeout, to say, hey, do you have a super short timeout? Like, is not going to work. Yep. Yep, back there.
I saw some places in the code, it had a prefix like Drupal /.
Yep.
So, like, in the future, is it also expected, like, can we expect this to work with, let's say, custom modules or packages that you have on your own, let's say GitHub or GitLab? Will it be supported in the future?
It will work in the context of Drupal. You can't like bring it in as a just generic Composer dependency.
For example, I have a module, let's say the namespace is foo,
Yeah.
and the module name is bar.
Yeah.
So,
Oh.
bar is in Composer.
Yeah. Package Manager doesn't care. My example module is just installing. Yeah. If the Package Manager stage base will install any Composer project. My example is just, I thought you were talking about the actual, like, my module name, my example module namespace. You're talking about Composer packages that you want to require or something. Like, it can handle generic ones, yeah. Yeah. Automatic updates and project browsers do not. Sort of that is one of the sort of reasons I want to get the Package Manager API, spread the knowledge, is because it is more generic as far as it's more just of a Composer API. The current implementations that use it, automatic updates and Drupal project browser, are really focused on just Drupal projects. But there's no reason that you have to be focused on that. I could easily change this example to like just take a package name directly and consider it a Composer package name, not a Drupal one. So that probably is a good addition in the future. Okay, I'm going to go on. Actually, yeah, okay, I'm going to go on to events. Okay. Okay, so events. So Package Manager just uses the Symfony events that Drupal core uses. We have pre-create, post-create, pre-require, post-require, pre-apply, and post-apply. And any of the pre-events basically can stop the operations from happening. So we'll give an example of like a pre-apply where we look at the code base, how it's changed, and say, well, no, I'm not going to allow that to actually happen. So the example we're going to look at is the project browser validator. There's also an update info one that if we have time we'll look at, but probably not. So the idea of this validator is just to customize project browser's behavior and ensure it only installs stable modules. So we register it as a event subscriber. We just give it the tag event subscriber. And then we tell it we have to implement, if people haven't done the event system in Drupal, basically you have to implement this event subscriber interface. And then one of the methods you have to, where is my Chrome? One of the methods you have to implement is get subscribed events. So we're going to listen to 2 events. Ooh. Okay. Status check and pre-apply. So status check event is basically for giving the user information in the UI. It doesn't actually stop things from happening, except if you can throw an error and sort of stop the whole system from working. And then pre-apply will actually avert the pre-apply event. So the first thing we're going to do in our method is we're going to basically target this to only project browser. So our subscriber gets an event. In this case, it's a pre-operation stage event. So pre-operation stage event is either like a pre-apply, status check, pre-create, any of those that can basically stop an event from happening or stop the package manager cycle in its process. So first thing we say is on the stage, we ask it, is there actually a stage directory? Because the status checks could be run before you start the update process just to know, like, should we start at all? So If there's not a stage directory or the stage type is not the type we're looking for, project browser, then we just return, we don't do anything else. We don't have any opinion on this package manager operation. If we get past that, what we want to do is we want to find out which packages were installed. So we can't just take what was required and say, oh, that's the new package, that's the one that was installed. We actually have to look at the code base and say, we installed module X, did it install module XYZ in addition when we did that? Because Composer is just going to install whatever dependencies. So what we do is we use this service called the Composer Inspector that Package Manager gives us. And then we want to get the installed packages, but for two different directories, one the active site and one the stage directory. After we do that, we're going to compare it and say, give me all the packages from the stage directory that are not in the active directory. So this will be all vendor packages. This will be the actual thing that we decided to update or to install, like web form in this case. And this will be any other like Drupal dependencies that the new module also needs. So the Composer Inspector, the one that we're using here is the Get Installed Packages list, but it also has helper functions for validating, basically running Composer audit and some other things to say, okay, is your Composer site in a good shape? And it does this sort of from the beginning of the process, because Composer will actually work in not the perfect state if your Composer setup's not in the perfect state. But we want to just sort of make sure that your site is as correct as possible, because since obviously you're not at the command line running these Composer operations, we want it to be as predictable as possible. So we really only go forward if your Composer audit comes back valid. Okay, so this is sort of the meat of the validator. First thing we do is we get the project name. So for any package, Composer package, we can ask it for the Drupal project name. So that's, often it's Drupal / the project name gives you the package name. That's not always the case. There's like random cases where people ask to change their machine name of their package. We really want to ask the system, for sure, what is the Drupal project name? If there's not one, then we don't care in this case for this example module, because we only care about Drupal projects. And then we use the version parser, which is a Composer provided utility class, and just says, hey, tell me the stability of this particular version that I'm installing. And in our case, if it's not stable, we're going to do this event add error. And that basically, anytime we add the error, Package Manager is going to look it basically fires the, in our case, pre-apply event, lets all the subscribers give their opinion on it. If any of the subscribers added an error, then Package Manager is not going to go forward. And then this is what it looks like in Project Browser. It just says, okay, you can't install this module. I actually kind of wish, there's a couple things in Project Browser that I've noticed while making this module. It's like they don't really need to tell you it's a stage event exception. They just should give you the message. So the nice thing about it is it's really simple. The fact that we can do that really, in some sense, has nothing to do with Project Browser. It's all to do with Package Manager. And we can sort of tell that because we can change this to work on our sort of very simple installer module by just saying, hey, if it's Project Browser or our sort of PME installer module, then don't go forward. And then that will basically give us the same error when we try to install a project on ours. It's going to fire the same event. It's going to look at the packages the same way and say, hey, you're trying to install web form. It's not stable. Okay, this is my time check of whether I should go into more code examples or questions and stuff. So let's pause. Let me see my timer. Questions so far with events, stages? That is not my dog. I did think about looking for my dog. I maybe have a couple pictures on my phone of her, but I don't think I have many GIFs. Yeah. This dog is actually a little thinner also because I kind of moved the GIF out for artistic purposes, so I hope it's none of y'all's dogs. Any questions, Vince? All right, so I'm going to go, because I have a few more minutes, I'm going to go just look at the couple other code examples. So the other thing besides the installer stage is I made a uninstall stage, and this is very similar to the install stage, and it's just a little bit more logic. And the idea here is that I created a form somewheres. Oh yeah, I need to get out of my slides. This is what this project looks like here, this installer. It basically just goes through, increase the font there. It looks for any projects that are currently not installed, Drupal projects, and says, hey, do you want to uninstall any of these? So the stage itself, the only sort of thing I had to do was, because the stage base actually always has this require method, like you send it in package names, it'll add packages. And the purpose of this one obviously is to uninstall. I just say, hey, if you try to call this method, I'm just going to tell you that's not what the purpose of this thing is for. And then I add a new public one called uninstall. I take a bunch of package names. And here I call, here basically I call the, yeah, okay, so this is kind of weirdly named. Stager here is a module, a PHP library called Composer Stager, which is kind of the underlying how we do the staging operations as a separate PHP library that you really don't have to deal with, but sort of that's why it's named Stager here. It's not a stage. I just sort of realized that that naming is kind of tricky. Anyways, we basically tell the Composer Stager, like, hey, in the stage directory, we require these modules. Basically, it can run sort of any composer command in that stage directory. So again, the stage itself is very simple. And then the form, this gets into where we sort of use the classes. Again, we have the composer inspector, the path locator to say, okay, which am I interested in, active or live, our own stage, module, like a service from Drupal core called module extension list, and then the module handler. So what I do here is basically, let me actually look through the I'll show you what the cancel one does too over here. You can always ask the stage, like, hey, is it available? Basically, can I do operations? The most common reason it would not be available is that there's another operation going on. So if there is another operation going on, then I'm just going to give you a form that says, like, do you want to cancel this operation? So for my purposes, I do this, what they call force destroy, meaning I don't care what's going on, I'm just going to delete it. Package Manager does have some safeguards to where it won't let you basically destroy a stage that it's currently applying. If it's been over an hour, then it will let you destroy it. But if you're currently applying code to your site, it's not going to let you easily come in. Actually, I don't think there's a way possible to, through the code, to actually destroy that site as it's applying. Because obviously, if you're applying code to your site and all of a sudden the source that you're copying back over disappears, then who knows what's going to happen to your site. So this is what the canceling does. But the uninstall basically just gets your extensions, and then, so get your modules, get your packages. So Drupal modules, Composer packages, there's an overlap, but they're not, you know, you could have Drupal modules that actually aren't registered with Composer. Usually you shouldn't, but it's possible. So, and then I want to figure out which modules or which packages are uninstallable. So I go through all my modules, and then I use this helper function to say, hey, for the package list in my active site, give me the package for this, give me the Composer package for this Drupal project name. And again, it does this sort of translation. one of the things we really like spend a lot of time doing this is because basically if you got that wrong, it would be a security concern. If you were saying, oh, well, I really, you know, I wanted to install webform UI, but the real project on Drupal.org is webform UI no underscore, but then somebody made one called webform underscore UI. If you got that wrong, then somebody could squat names that are very similar and basically trick you to installing a insecure version, say, of webform, say if there was a module called webform UI. So you always want to run these through the helper functions to say, I'm not going to assume what the conversion is here. I want to always know that I got the right one. Package Manager does have subscribers itself, though, that check to make sure that at the end of the process, before you copy stuff over, you've only gotten secure versions. So basically, I get the package for the Drupal module. If I don't have a package, meaning like, okay, this wasn't installed via Composer for some reason, then I just skip it. Otherwise, I check if it exists. And this is basically Drupal's core way of saying, is this module currently enabled? If it is enabled, then I say, if it's not, then I say, well, I can uninstall this. And then the other thing that I have to make sure is I want to check required packages, meaning one Composer packages could have many Drupal modules. So I don't want to just assume because I have webform not installed that some other package that webform itself also provides is not enabled. So you sort of have to do this dance of like Drupal projects versus packages and what's the overlap for the ones that they exist that are enabled on the site. And then basically I just, at the end, make basically the form of these are the ones that have passed that say, these are projects that contain Drupal modules that are currently not installed that also live in Composer. And in the submit here, I also did the very simple version of not using the batch. I put the note here to say this is not why, that you shouldn't do this, you should use the batch system. And again, just like I was doing in the other one, I create, in our case, we have a new operation called uninstall because the stage has a new public method called uninstall. I send it the packages, I apply, which then copies all the code back to my site, do post apply, and then at the end, whether things are okay or not okay, I always destroy the stage. Any questions about that one? And then the only other thing that's in the example module currently is another subscriber that will update info. So this one doesn't actually stop anything from happening, but the idea is that package or automatic updates say by default it's just going to say, oh, you're updating from Drupal core 11.00 to 11.15. But you might want more information. You might actually want to know all the Composer packages that have changed in this update. So here I'm only going to listen to status check because I'm not actually trying to stop anything from happening. I'm not going to worry about pre-apply. So I'm going to listen to status check and automatic updates. When it shows you the form, like basically you say, I want to update core. It says, okay, I'm going to stage everything, and then it shows you another form, run status check, and any messages it gets back from the status check event, it's going to display on the screen. So here, again, I'm just checking to say like, hey, do we actually have a staging directory? Are we at the point in the process that we've staged the code? If we are, then I go forward, and again, I look at package. I use Composer Inspector to tell me all of the packages for active, the active directory. In that case, we use the path locator git project root, and then git stage directory, because the stage will change for each stage can control like where it wants to put the stage directories. Whoops. And in this case, it's similar where in this case, there's another helper function that says, get me packages with different versions between the active site and the stage site. And similar to when I was looping through the new modules now, or the new packages, now I just loop through the changed packages and I just add a message for each one that says, hey, the active version of this module is, say, 1000, and the stage version is now 200. And here, I add a warning. So when the other subscriber, I added a error. So that's going to stop the process from going forward. If I just add a warning, it doesn't really do anything to the operation, but anybody who's making a UI on top of Package Manager should put that information onto the screen to say, hey, the subscribers want to give the user, the event subscribers want to give the user more context about what's going on, put the messages on the screen. So if you're integrating with, say, automatic updates or project browser, it's not your responsibility to make sure those messages get on the screen. You just need to add the warnings or errors, and then those modules are required or should put those messages on the screen. If you are making your own UI, like our installer or uninstaller forms, then it's your responsibility to run the status checks and say, hey, did I get any information back from the subscribers that I should put on the screen? Any other questions? Questions in general about Package Manager? Yes.
How does this, or does it, dovetail with version control?
Yeah, so right now it doesn't. There is an issue, because there is a lot of different ways that people are going to want to do this. So there is a module. One of the things I was going to say at the end is there is a module called Automatic Updates Extras, and we're sort of like trying out different ideas there to basically, and part of it was to sort of get people to sort of either, you could use this Package Manager API to work on stuff just that deals with your sites or your custom code, or you can add it to a module like this. So right now you would actually have to write a subscriber that says, okay, you just made a change, and then what is the logic that you want to do at that point? So you maybe want to cut a tag before you actually do the operations. You might want to not allow any operations to even start if your get status is not clean. So it doesn't handle that now, but the event system would be where we would want to handle that. I kind of doubt it will get into the main modules though, so I'm expecting there will be more contrib modules around that space, just because there's just not one sort of way that people sort of want to handle that kind of stuff. Yeah.
You said this only works in the Drupal context. So I'm assuming that means that it wouldn't work, like, say, like in some event file from Composer. It would need to be, like, Drupal would need to be...
You mean if you like actually run a Composer command? Yeah.
Post-require command like I'm doing.
No, it doesn't deal with Composer events directly. Trying to think. We have a command line tool in automatic updates, and that's kind of solely so that it doesn't have to run solely on cron, so you can set up a separate process. I think we do ship with the Composer plugin, but I can't remember exactly what our use is for it. But yeah, it's sort of separate from Composer events. Any other questions? Anybody have any examples of, the title was Making Composer Aware Modules. Does anybody have an example of what type of Composer Aware module they wanted to make? And do you think this API could be helpful for it?
I've built out an internal tool called Drupal, just to do reporting back to a central location internally. And this is kind of incorporating a lot of ideas, like having that wrapper around the update system
Yeah.
would have been a big boom.
Yeah.
This being able to actually look at Composer instead of just the update system
Yeah.
would also be exceptionally helpful. So
Yeah.
reporting setup.
Yeah, I mean, you could potentially use this API, like, even if you didn't want to do any operations, if it was just to inspect the system, to get, to like the helper to get the packages information, you could use it for that. Any other examples of people? It said make composer aware modules. Did anybody have any idea what that meant? Or like, yeah.
We have a big distribution.
Yeah.
People have dirtied up a lot.
Yeah.
And so being able to create lists of, like, have it, the site have some awareness of what's installed.
Yeah.
And like report that back in a way that would be easy to digest.
Okay, cool.
Would it be possible to have this, take a look at the patches section of composer.json, be able to put up kind of like a report, modules, versioning stuff to say, this site has these patches?
Yeah, it has some functionality around just like running generic composer commands and getting generic composer config information. The only thing we do with composer patches right now is one of our status validators just to say, if you have composer patches on your site, you have to have the flag that says fail the composer operation if the patch doesn't apply. That's the default setting. You would, like, if you have composer patches, that's the way it works. But you can actually turn that off to just say, like, I don't actually care if my patch applies, just keep going forward. So we just, as a security method, as a security precaution, we just say you have to have that set up unless you really like run through some hoops, because the idea is like, you know, if you're going through the UI, running composer operations and all of a sudden your patches no longer apply, that's often going to be a security concern. So we sort of force that to happen. So it could find out about stuff about composer patches, but not specifically about that library, but it has helpers to get you like composer config information from your composer.json file. Yeah. Any other questions? Things you wish it would do that you realize, oh, it doesn't do that. That sucks. All right. So, questions, we went over that. So contrib, if you're here on Thursday, I will be in the room if you have questions. There's some example issues on the automatic updates extras where we have some sort of like, we're using this API if you want to give a stab at any of that. If you look at the Git Hub repository that I linked, the package manager examples, and you have questions about it, feel free to ask me. Yeah, I think we're at time. Thanks a lot for coming, really.